being in Russia and talking with the people in Russia, and do they feel that they need to, improve the relationship between Russia and Europe, or they don't see Europe as a viable, partner anymore?
It hasn't been too long since Russia and Europe had viable economic relations. We're talking 4 years. And so I'd be a liar if I said that there wasn't a fondness for Europe amongst people. But that fondness is rapidly dissipating, rapidly. Uh, First of all, Europe has emerged as sort of a sick society. Um, Russia is not a perfect nation. They have their problems. You don't need to highlight them, but it's for a nation that has great family values, why are there so many single mothers? You know, um, you know, there's problems in Russia just like there's problems everywhere.
Yeah.
So but the Russians are aware of their problems. Then they do their best. I can tell you that I can't walk down the streets of Paris at midnight randomly and be fearless. You have to be concerned. I can't walk down the streets of any European city after midnight without being concerned. I can't walk down the streets of any American city after midnight. I could walk down the streets of now I know there's a place in Moscow I could go where I could get in trouble. I mean, I don't know where it is, but I'm just assuming, just like any other place in the world, there's bad places. But I haven't found it yet, and I'm not looking for it. Moscow is a safe city. And that's reflective of, but it's not just Moscow. Novosibirsk is a safe city. Irkutsk is a safe city. Ekaterinburg is a safe city. Kazan is a safe city. Volgograd is a safe city. Grozny is a very safe city. Russia is a nation that's got its act together, and it's getting better and better every day. Yes, they're hampered by sanctions. Let's not pretend that sanctions don't come with a cost. I mean, any economy is supposed to function under, some sort of normalcy of relationships with neighboring economies. The normal transaction that takes place. Here, Russia is, sanctioned. It can't operate normal. Its economy had to make adjustments, and we're talking about major adjustments that are being made in a very short period of time. But the Russian economy is thriving. Donald Trump, the great American economist, president, Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Trade. Our economy, has grown 1.6% last year? Russia grew 4%. That's under sanctions. So the point I'm trying to make is the Russian people would like good relations with Europe, but they no longer feel like they need good relations with Europe. In fact, I was at the Metropole Hotel, and for one brief shining moment, it was like Russia of the old days, because the Metropole was filled with round eyes, white people from Europe and America who came to Russia just like we used to in the good old days. The Europeans, the Americans came to Russia to meet with the Russians, and everything was great. And the hotel looked like the good old days. And then one by one, the round eyes left. And I remember going to breakfast on my last morning there. I was the last round eye in the Metropole. It's all Chinese. All Chinese. Every single table full of Chinese delegations. And I mean, that is Moscow. The Chinese are there. And they're the ones doing business with Russians. Now, would you say that, Russia would prefer to do business with Europeans? Maybe 2 years ago. Today, why? What does Europe have to offer? Nothing. They're collapsed economies. They're failed societies. China is the economic heart of the world. And Russia's on good relations with the Chinese. This is a strategic shift in the way of thinking. The Chinese are everywhere. Chinese cars are everywhere. China is everywhere. And all the people that try to say, well, the Chinese don't produce good, they produce damn good stuff. Their stuff works. It's high quality. And Russia's becoming accustomed to this. There used to be a time when the Russians would die before buying something that said made in China. Today, they're happy to buy something made in China because it's good quality stuff. And most importantly, the Chinese are their friends. You can't. Can you say that about the Europeans? No. Can you say that about the Americans? Sadly, no. The Chinese are there to do business, but do business as friends. They're not trying to impose things on you. There's no Chinese sanctions of Russia. The Chinese are there to do a business contract. Now they run a hard deal, a hard bargain. I'm not saying the Chinese are giving the Russians, good deals, but the Russians know this, and the Russians, make the deals they need to make. But no, Russia doesn't need Europe at all. It doesn't want Europe. I mean, if the time comes when relations are improved, Europe just has to get in line. There's not going to be, oh, you're European, come to the front. And America's losing this window. There is a limited window where if we improved relations with Russia, we might get invited to the front of certain lines. But the Russians, I think we've actually missed that opportunity because the hardening of the Russian position with the United States, to flip the script, as I already said, to say, no, it's not up to us to come up with a viable option for peace. It's up to you. And until you do so, we don't want to meet with you. That's a new reality. That's a hardening of the position. It's reflective of the fact that Russia doesn't need the United States. And we just proved it. We sanctioned their two largest oil producers. Is that an act of friendship? Is that something that's going to engender the Russians saying, we really want to do business with you guys? No. Russia wants to do business with the Chinese economy that needs energy and is willing to buy that energy from Russia. Even if it's at a discount, it's okay. At least Russia's doing business with it.
Do they see the window of partnership with the United States still open, or they feel that is disappearing from the scene? It seems because Donald Trump was some sort of change in the way that Russia feels about the United States. They saw somebody that they can talk with, which was a huge change after all.
I think we have to be careful here. The Russians are very pragmatic, very realistic. When I spoke with Anatoly Antonov, he was the ambassador of Russia to the United States. We'd have lunch on occasion, and the one thing that he said when he talked about American politics is he said, "We don't really care who wins. What we want is predictability. Whoever wins, just be predictable, because then we'll know where you're coming from. Be predictable for us or be predictable against us. But either way, we will craft a policy in response that allows us to do strategic planning and things of that nature. What we don't want is unpredictability." Well, Donald Trump is literally the single most unpredictable thing that's happened to American politics. Now, the Russians, of course, have had to adapt to that. I'm not going to put words in the Russian government's mouth. That's not my job. They get to speak for themselves. I'll say this, what I've interpreted. The Russians have said the things that needed to be said to create the potential for better U.S.-Russian relations. But they haven't fundamentally changed anything about how they do business and how they operate. And so even though they've said things about creating the opportunity for better relations, the fact that the United States has failed to take advantage of this has had no meaningful impact on Russia, because Russia didn't change any of its underlying fundamental realities. Russia didn't change its approach to strategic nuclear deterrence. Russia didn't change its economic priorities. Russia didn't change anything. The reality of Russia has always been to deal with the facts, not the theory. And potential of better U.S.-Russian relations is theoretical only. There's been nothing of substance that's worked its way down, to the disappointment of many Russian ambassadors who have said, we're waiting for the United States to do something. We hear words, but there is nothing taking place of a fundamental nature, a discernible nature. And so I don't think the Russians really care. I think they're fed up with Donald Trump. They won't say it because they're diplomatic and they always hope for better relations. But the hardening of the Russian position, where they flip the script, no longer are they, we're willing to work with the United States on this. No, the United States has to start working with Russia. And that's the signal that Russia sent. And I think it's important that they did that, because I think there was a recognition that Russia's words were being misinterpreted by the United States as a sign of weakness. not because Russia was weak, but because it allowed people like Marco Rubio, Keith Kellogg, Scott Bessent to say, oh, see, the Russians aren't taking a hardline position. That must mean that they're desperate for peace. So we just need to double down. And the Russians are like, we haven't changed anything. The Russians didn't slow their offensive. They didn't stop bombing. They didn't stop doing anything. Fact is, they put the pedal to the metal. But Keith Kellogg and everybody else said, no, Putin's weak, this, that, idiots like Gilbert Doctorow, it's weak, we're in the fall. Nothing close to that. But the Russians now have just basically said, no, we're going to send a different signal to the United States. We're done playing stupid games. And when you're ready to talk to us, come and talk to us. We'll be more than happy to receive you. But you're the one that has to come up with the plan, not us.
Does Washington understand how deep is the partnership between Russia and China?
They're about to get a lesson. I think Trump is supposed to meet with Xi Jinping in the near future, and I think he's
today. It's going to be today.
Today, yeah.
5, yeah.
And he's going to be schooled because the Chinese, I don't believe, are going to budge on anything. In fact, they're going to double down on rare earth minerals, and they're going to tell Trump to pound sand when it comes to Russian oil. And I think they're also going to say that any secondary sanctions against China on Russian oil will result in severe consequences for anything else, that there can be no trade relationship with the threat of secondary sanctions over China, that China will not allow its energy security needs to be subordinated to the whim of an American government. Now, what Trump does, I don't know. He's got, Rubio and Bessent are two, idiots who have been whispering bad advice in his ears. Hopefully Donald Trump will take the bull by the horns and bring an end to some of this nonsense. They're getting away with the bullying of India to some extent, but even the Indian government has said, from the state purchasing of Russian oil will continue. They can't control what happens with private, Indian companies like Resilience, I think, is Reliance, whatever their name is, largest purchaser of private purchaser. They put it on hold because they're nervous about secondary sanctions. India doesn't have the leverage over the American economy that China does, so India has to play a certain games. But even India is not going to walk away from Russia. Look, they just signed, major contracts with Russia on airlines. The Russians have built a Russian airliner made out of all Russian parts. Thank you, America. I'm sure Boeing's happy that Russia now has divorced itself from the necessity of continued contractual relationship with Boeing. The same thing with the Airbus. Russia will produce its own airliner. And India is now going to be helping Russia in this regard. So, Trump is going to come to the face-to-face with the reality that he doesn't get to dictate outcomes, especially to a nation like China, who actually holds all the cards.